Hey there, and welcome. Have you ever stopped to think about what a giant tree, a tiny mushroom, and you all have in common? Well, it all comes down to just a few fundamental types of large biological molecules. These are the absolute building blocks of every single living thing on Earth, and today we're going to break them all down.
So let's just jump right in with the pretty big question. What are you actually made of? I mean, forget skin and bones for a second. If you could zoom all the way in, right down to the molecular level, what would you find? The answer is both incredibly complex and, beautifully simple, and that's exactly what this explainer is all about.
So, here's the game plan for today. We're going to look at what I call the pillars of life. First, we'll cover the energy providers, that's our carbs and lipids. Then we'll meet the cellular workforce, the proteins. After that, we'll decode the master blueprint, good old DNA. And to wrap it all up, we'll see how they all connect in the central story of life.
All right, first up, the energy providers. It's simple, right? Every living thing needs fuel to survive, to move, to grow. And that fuel comes mainly in the form of carbohydrates and lipids.
So let's talk about carbohydrates. You've heard of them, sugars, starches, that kind of thing. They're all built from just three elements, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And the most fundamental of all of them is glucose. This little guy with the formula C6H12O6 is the star of the show. It's the key molecule your cells break down in a process called respiration to release the energy that powers, well, everything you do.
Okay, now this is where it gets really cool. Simple little glucose units can be linked together, kind of like beads on a string, to form these huge molecules called polysaccharides. When they link up into a spiral, you get starch. That's how plants store their energy. When it's a branch chain, it's glycogen. That's how we animals store it. And when they form these strong, straight chains, you get cellulose, the tough stuff that makes up plant cell walls. Think about that. The exact same building block, just arranged differently, gives you completely different materials with totally different jobs. That's efficiency.
Okay, so we know these things are in our food, but how can we actually prove it? How do scientists find them? Well, biologists have this awesome toolkit of simple chemical tests to figure it out. This is super practical stuff, and trust me, it's something you'll definitely want to know for your exams.
All right, for starch, it's the iodine test. It's super simple. You just add a few drops of this orange-brown iodine solution, and if there's any starch in your sample, boom, it turns this deep, dark blue-black. For simple sugars, like glucose, we use Benedict's solution. You add the blue solution to your sample, but this time you have to heat it. If sugar's there, you get this amazing color change. It'll go from blue to green to yellow, and finally to this brick red color. And get this, the final color actually gives you a clue about how much sugar is there. Pretty neat, right?
Okay, let's switch gears to our other energy providers, lipids. You probably know them as fats and oils. They're also made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, but they have way less oxygen than carbs do. Their structure is really consistent. You've got one glycerol molecule holding onto three long fatty acid chains. You can kind of think of them as the body's high-density energy vault.
But wait, there's more. They do so much more than just store energy. In fact, lipids store way more energy per gram than carbohydrates do, which makes them perfect for long-term storage. Plus, they're absolutely essential for making the membranes of all our cells, and they provide vital insulation and protection for our organs.
So how do we catch these fats in the act? With something called the ethanol emulsion test. The test is actually pretty clever. See, fats hate water, right? They don't mix, but they dissolve just fine in ethanol. So you shake up your food sample with some ethanol, then you pour that ethanol into a tube of water. If there were any lipids, they suddenly have nowhere to go, so they pop out of the solution as tiny droplets, creating this cloudy, milky white emulsion. Simple, but so effective.
Wow, okay, we've just powered through a ton of info on our energy providers and how to test for them. If these breakdowns are making sense and helping with your O-level revision, if you could just take a second to hit that like button and subscribe, it really lets us know we're on the right track and helps us create more of these explainers for you. Now, let's meet the workforce of the cell.
Okay, let's dive into our second pillar, the cellular workforce. If carbohydrates and lipids are the fuel and the power station, then proteins are the workers, the machines, and the managers that do pretty much everything else in the cell.
So what are they? Well, proteins are complex molecules built from carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and this really crucial fourth element, nitrogen. At their core, they're just these really long folded chains of smaller units called amino acids.
There are 20 different kinds of amino acids, and the specific sequence they're put in is absolutely critical. And this is the mind-blowing part. If you change just one amino acid in that long chain, you can end up with a completely different protein that does a completely different job. The precision is just incredible.
And when we say they do everything, we're not kidding. Their functions are just all over the map. You have enzymes that speed up chemical reactions, antibodies that act like your body's security guards, fighting off germs. You've got hemoglobin in your blood, which is like a delivery truck for oxygen. And then you have structural proteins like keratin, which literally builds your hair and nails. They really are the workhorses of the body.
So what's the test for these protein workers? It's called the burette test. All you do is add some of this blue burette solution to your sample and give it a shake. If protein is there, that solution will turn from blue to this really distinct purple or violet color. No mistaking that one. It's a really clear and reliable test.
Okay, before we wrap up the food tests, there's one more you've got to know for your exams: the test for vitamin C. Now, just to be clear, vitamin C isn't a carbohydrate, a lipid, or a protein, but it's another super important biological molecule. To test for it, we use a purple solution called DCPIP, and it's simple. When you add a sample that has vitamin C in it, the DCPIP loses its color and becomes totally clear.
All right, it's time for our third pillar. And honestly, you could argue this is the most important molecule of them all. We're talking about the master blueprint, the molecule that holds all the instructions for building and running an entire organism. We are talking about DNA.
So, DNA. It stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, which is a mouthful, I know. It's tucked away safely in the nucleus of almost all your cells, and its job is to carry the genetic code. But here's the main takeaway, the absolute key job of DNA. It tells the cell exactly how to build proteins, which amino acids to use, and what specific order to put them in.
Now, the structure of DNA is probably one of the most iconic shapes in all of science, right? That famous double helix. It's made of two long strands coiled around each other, like a twisted ladder. The rungs of the ladder are made of 4 chemical bases: adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. And this is where it gets really important. They don't just pair up randomly. There's an unbreakable rule, what we call the golden rule of base pairing. Adenine, or A, always pairs with thymine, T, and cytosine, C, always pairs with guanine, G. Always.
Okay, so we've met the fuel, we've met the workforce, and we've met the master blueprint. Now for the grand finale. Let's pull it all together and see how these pillars work together to tell the central story of life.
This table is a perfect way to pull it all together. You can see right there at the top, our carbohydrates, built from simple sugars, are all about quick energy. Right below, the lipids, made of glycerol and fatty acids, are for our long-term energy storage and membranes. Then you've got the proteins, our cellular machinery, built from those all-important amino acids. And holding it all together is the plan, the DNA, built from nucleotides, which carries all of our genetic information.
And this diagram, right here, this is the story of life in a nutshell. It all starts with the DNA, the blueprint. Those instructions are read and used to build the protein workforce. And that workforce, especially the enzymes, then goes on to manage and use the carbohydrates and lipids, which provide all the fuel and raw materials for everything the cell needs to do. It's this beautiful continuous loop, a dynamic, self-sustaining system that's happening in your trillions of cells right now.
So I want to leave you with this final kind of mind-blowing thought. Every single living thing you can possibly imagine, from the tiniest bacterium to the biggest blue whale, is built from this exact same molecular toolkit. The fact that all the incredible diversity of life we see around us, it all comes from the nearly infinite ways you can combine and arrange just these 4 types of molecules, it's just amazing.
And that's a wrap. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer from Spotwork Learning, your O-level success partner. We'll catch you in the next one.